Part 49. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mocnu. Chapter 481. The man who suddenly appeared behind the wolf pack was full of ruffian spirit. As soon as he appeared, he rushed into the wolf pack without hesitation and started a crazy slaughter. The short-haired man swung his arms out, and in an instant, they turned into narrow steel blades, and his skin turned into a piece of blue iron. The ferocious wolves were as fragile as white paper wherever they passed. Before they could dodge, their bodies were cut in half by the sharp blade. Shua! The blood splashing in the sky quickly dyed the ground red, and it was at this time that the surrounding wolves reacted. The wolves turned around and gave up the siege of the four people, and rushed towards the man with their teeth bared. Awoo! Hundreds of gray-black mutant wolves quickly engulfed the man, but the latter was like a meat grinder. Dozens of wolves were beheaded in an instant and died. Even the Wolf King let out a long howl in the next second and joined the wolf pack that besieged the man. But what was shocking was that even the S-level Snow White Wolf King was not the man's opponent. The Wolf King's huge body was whipped by the man and flew under a giant tree behind. There was a loud bang, the giant tree collapsed, and the Wolf King's white chest and abdomen were stained with a large pool of blood, and there was no sound. Looking at the ruffian man again, he had turned back to normal, with his hands in his pockets and walked out of the wolf corpses on the ground. The ruffian man covered in blood curled his lips, walked to the fallen Wolf King, bent down, and stabbed down with his arm like a knife. With another puff, the man stood up, and there was already a dark purple crystal core in his hand. The short-haired man threw the crystal core in his hand and asked the fat man and the other four with a ruffian look. "Hey, where are you guys from?" At this moment, two more figures walked out of the forest behind, obviously the man's companions. The short-haired man who suddenly appeared from the forest was the destructive level strongman who worked like a slave for Muqiu and the others, Yeshinwei. Facing Yeshinwei's questioning, the orc man and the heroic woman were stunned for a moment, with a hint of vigilance in their eyes. The fat man obviously saw that the man in front of him was extraordinary. With a turn of his eyes, he quickly came out from the back and explained to Yeshinwei. He was smooth and quickly revealed his prepared words to Yeshinwei. Dongyi base. Yeshinwei pondered the name of the base mentioned by the fat man. He seemed to have heard of such a name vaguely, but it should not be a large base. In the fat man's mouth, they were reinforcements sent by a base called Dongyi to reinforce the Battle of the Beast Nest. But their group encountered a herd of beasts on the way, separated from the main force, and fled to this mountain forest to avoid the herd of beasts. There were originally dozens of people in our group, but now there are only 4 of us left. As the fat man spoke, tears appeared on the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, as if his true feelings were revealed. Lost. Yeshinwei frowned and subconsciously threw the blood-stained crystal core in his hand. The dark purple crystal core flashed a strange light under the sunlight. The fat man beside him couldn't help swallowing his saliva, and beads of sweat the size of beans appeared on his forehead. The S-level Wolf King could be easily solved in a few moves. It was obvious that the short-haired man in front of him was extraordinary. Just as the fat man was secretly nervous, a pleasant and light female voice suddenly came from behind the short-haired man. "If I'm not mistaken, what you just used should be the weapon box of Zilan base." Yefanyan walked in front of the fat man and the others, and opened her cherry lips and spoke. "Whether it is the laser double knives used by the orc man or the crystal core gloves worn by the woman in camouflage uniform, they obviously exceed the standards of modern technology. The only one that can produce such powerful technological equipment is the Zilan base that was destroyed by the Yanjai dynasty." The fat man scratched his head and explained, "Our base has traded with the Zilan base before, and exchanged a lot of technological equipment." Yefanyan's eyes became a little deep, and he turned his head to look behind him. "Chiu Mu, do you know this Dongyi base?" The fat man standing behind was shocked when he saw that the other party actually had the means to verify it. "Dongyi base? A magnetic male voice came from behind, and a figure wearing a black robe and a crimson mask slowly walked out of the forest. I seem to have heard of this name. The masked figure walked to the side of Yefanyan and Yeshinwei, and the latter couldn't help but take a step back. Where was the arrogant look just now? The fat man was originally nervous about his identity being exposed. You know, the humans of the Eternal Night Dynasty are not popular among the human race. But what he didn't expect was that the other party actually helped him hide it. When he looked up nervously, he saw a slender figure in a black robe. When he looked into the eyes of the smiling eyes, he swallowed unnaturally. The familiar black robe, the fancy mask, and the eyes with a playful look. They look so similar. This dress and the cynical eyes are exactly the same as the master in their family. He opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but stopped abruptly. Yefanyan frowned and looked at the fat man and the other four with a suspicious look. Since you are the team to reinforce the Battle of the Beast Nest, you should carry a communication device with you, right? After hearing this, the fat man decisively took out a half-corroded communicator from his pocket, which had obviously been broken for some time. Then, the fat man recounted all the tragic experiences along the way, which were so miserable that he burst into tears. Although there was some exaggeration in his words, judging from the clothes and injuries of the four people, they had obviously suffered a lot to get here. When Yefanyan heard the experience from the fat man, the suspicion in his eyes faded a lot. After all, in the depths of this dangerous forest, the fat man and his fellow humans were obviously not the primary targets they needed to be vigilant about. Yeshinwei still maintained a skeptical attitude and looked at the fat man with a rogue face. You just crossed the valley and came to the depths of the dense forest. To get here, the place you must pass is the territory of the Valley Crow. Let alone the space barrier that even Yeshinwei could not break, the thousands of alien believers there were not something these four people could fight against. In response, the fat man looked at the masked man in a black robe beside him. He pulled the purple-skinned little boy beside him. We can get here entirely thanks to this child's ability. He is a rare space awakener, and his ability is space jumping. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 482. Space Awakener. Yefanyan and Yeshinwei were surprised at the same time, and their eyes were all looking at the little boy who was held by the fat man's hand and had no expression on his face. In the end times, besides the rare element awakeners, what other types of superpowers are more powerful? Without a doubt, it is the space-time superpowers. The White Death God in Yuhei was famous for his ability to travel through space. After being promoted to the destruction level, he killed the old destruction level strongman one who was city lord with a strong means. The words time and space, as long as one of them is touched, it represents unlimited potential and unpredictable talents. Neither of them thought that the boy in front of them, who was less than a teenager, was actually a rare space awakener. Muchu's eyes flashed when he heard the words, and his deep eyes stared at the boy in front of him. At the fat man's signal, the boy stretched out his finger expressionlessly and passed it in front of him. The space in front of him actually cracked a finger-sized gap. No doubt, this wave is indeed the power of space. The fat man spread his hands helplessly and explained. This child is indeed an awakener of space ability. It is precisely because of his space jumping ability that we can come here safely. But his ability has certain disadvantages. Disadvantages? Yes, his ability can only be used for one-way space transmission, and the range of application is very unstable, ranging from hundreds of kilometers to only a few meters. A strange expression appeared on the fat man's face. And this child's ability must absorb enough crystal core energy to be activated. There are too many constraints, otherwise we would have arrived at the beast's nest now. After listening to the fat man's story, Yefanyan and the others looked at the boy with a look of pity in their eyes. If there were no such constraints, this boy's talent could be said to be rare in the world, 1 in a million. However, Yeshinwei's eyes suddenly flashed with a sharp light, and he said, "You mean, as long as this kid absorbs enough crystal cores, he can take us to the beast's nest through space?" The fat man looked at the black-robed masked man in front of him with a cryptic look, and then nodded gently. "That's the truth." "Damn, that's great." Yeshinwei almost clapped his hands in praise. He had had enough of being a slave for a long time. If he could be given another chance to choose, he would never wade into the muddy water of southern Xinjiang. As if he had noticed the strange looks from others, Yeshinwei touched the back of his head awkwardly and said with a wry smile, "I think it's getting late now. It's best to get to the beast's nest quickly to help our human race." As soon as he finished speaking, he looked at everyone and said, "You need a crystal core, right? Wait, I'll find it for you." After that, he didn't even look back and rushed into the deep and dense forest in front of him. The stunned people looked at each other, and the fat man pointed at Yeshinwei's back. "Is he, okay?" Mu Qiu shook his head and narrowed his eyes. He looked at Yefanyan beside him and asked the latter to collect the crystal cores together, while he stayed here to look after the few people. Yefanyan also nodded when she heard the words. She was also aware of Mu Qiu's strength. Although his true strength is not yet clear, ordinary S-level awakeners are not his opponents at all. The fat man looked at Yefanyan's departing back, turned stiffly, and looked at the masked man beside him, trying his best to think of the words. This gentleman, may I ask you?" The black robe fluttered in the wind, and Mu Qiu's eyes under the mask were full of playful teasing. Looking at the fat man in front of him who was at a loss, Mu Qiu did not intend to provoke the former's weak heart. He took off the mask on his face with his backhand, revealing a handsome face. "Tell me, what is the purpose of your trip to southern Xinjiang?" The familiar face was in front of him, and the fat man's heart jumped suddenly, and his pupils trembled. Then he suddenly rushed forward, hugged Mu Qiu's thigh and cried bitterly, "My God, I finally found you!" Mu Qiu's mouth twitched slightly, and he resisted the urge to slap him away. He thought Yeshinwei was already shameless enough, and the fat man in front of him was obviously thicker than him. The orc man and the heroic woman on the side immediately knelt on one knee the moment they saw Mu Qiu, and said respectfully, "The 18 riders of Yuyun, Zufeng/Zuyu pay their respects to the adults." The little boy stood there in a daze, like an exquisite porcelain doll. Mu Qiu looked at the two people kneeling and said, "Who are they?" The fat man pointed at the two people. "They are all newly promoted S-level awakeners under Boss G, from the Yuhei law enforcement team, and this time they specially escorted me to southern Xinjiang." "Why are you here?" Mu Qiu sensed it specially, and there were indeed only 4 of them around. The fat man smiled bitterly and said, "Since you lost contact for no reason, Sister Xiao and Boss G and others have been trying their best to find your trace." After hearing the fat man's story, Mu Qiu finally understood why the fat man and others came here. Mu Qiu once met Xue Xiaokong, the former leader of the first battle group of Qingyang base, in the ruined town. The latter finally entered the shadow passage set up by Mu Qiu. Thanks to Xue Xiaokong's intelligence, Xiao Hanyan and others knew that Mu Qiu was now in the southern Xinjiang beast nest, and the major bases also sent a large number of reinforcements to the southern Xinjiang to encircle the beast nest. Even the Thunder God, who is known as the strongest existence of the human race, rushed to the direction of the beast nest, which shows the huge force of the human race this time. Sister Xiao immediately ordered the Eternal Night Army to march towards the southern Xinjiang direction. Because it is not clear whether you are safe, Sister Xiao made special preparations to fight with the coalition forces. Xiao Hanyan is worthy of being the former queen of Yuhe. In this operation, she continued her usual thunderous style. Considering that she will face many top human race masters such as Thunder God this time, she not only gathered the Eternal Night Army to march towards the southern Xinjiang, but also made second-hand preparations behind the scenes. Since the target of the human coalition this time is the Beast King in the Beast Nest. She intended to reach a consensus with the Beast King in secret, and unite the tens of millions of mutant beasts in the 10,000 Beasts mountain range to fight against the encirclement of the human coalition. And this is also the reason why Fatty and others appeared here this time. Contact the Beast King in the 10,000 Beasts nest and take the opportunity to deal the most fatal blow to the human coalition. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 483. After listening to Fatty's story, Miuchiu couldn't help but feel very emotional. Xiao Hanyan is still as vigorous and resolute as ever, even if the opponent is a compatriot of the human race, he will not show mercy. In the eyes of this former queen, from the moment the so-called orthodox human race chose to be the enemy of the Yanjai dynasty, the two sides have been unrelenting enemies. In this cruel apocalypse where everyone is in danger, the so-called concept of race no longer seems so important. In the final analysis, it is just driven by the interests of all parties. Xiao Hanyan's plan was very thorough. He first asked Fatty and others to cooperate with the Beast King in advance. When the human alliance attempted to attack the Beast's nest, the Yanjai army joined hands with the Beast's nest to counterattack, catching the human race by surprise. If all this goes well, this battle will completely defeat the general trend of the human race. So, who is this little guy? Miuchiu suddenly looked at the little boy standing aside with a confused expression. The latter was glanced at by Miuchiu, and he didn't feel anything at first. But suddenly, blood-red light flashed in Miuchiu's deep eyes, and an indescribable surge of supreme kingly power rushed towards her face. The little boy was the first to bear the brunt of this coercion. A look of awe suddenly appeared on his face, and his dark eyes turned into blood. His legs couldn't help but soften, and he knelt down with a pop. With blood-red eyes and blue-purple skin, the young man in front of him is undoubtedly the Eternal Night royal family, which has made countless human beings fearful and uneasy. The Lord of Eternal Night is a creator-like existence to the royal family of Eternal Night, and their awe has been deeply engraved in their instincts. Just this hint of aura revealed, and the little boy who didn't know why felt his soul tremble and his heart was afraid. Big beads of sweat appeared on the fat man's forehead. Just the lingering power of that breath made him almost suffocated and afraid to move. It wasn't until a few breaths passed that he wiped the sweat from his forehead and said with a smile, "This child is one of the most talented among the Yanjai royal family. His ability is the space jump I just mentioned, but he has not yet been able to fully control this ability." The little boy still knelt down in front of Miuchiu with his knees on the ground. After the pressure released by Miuchiu dissipated, he still had a look of confusion on his face. Now this child has been accepted as a student by Boss G. We can get here smoothly this time, thanks to his spatial ability. Ji Yufeng wants to control the 18 Yu Yun cavalry under his command, and he is still the main force leading the Yanjai army. Naturally, he cannot go deep into the hinterland of the Beast's Nest at will. Therefore, Fatty was sent as the vanguard of this expedition, not only to spy on the enemy's situation, but also as an envoy to contact the Beast's Nest. Ji Yufeng's apprentice. Miuchiu's eyes flashed with amusement. To be accepted as a disciple by Ji Yufeng, it seems that this little guy's talent is really amazing. Looking at the ignorant young man kneeling on the ground in front of him, and then thinking of Ji Yufeng's icy face that kept strangers away, there was really an inexplicable sense of disobedience. "May I have your name?" Miuchiu walked up to the boy and leaned down, with a spring-like smile on her face, like an amiable big brother next door. Frightened by the powerful pressure just now, the boy's face showed no trace of fear when facing Miuchiu, and he still looked confused. Looking directly at Miuchiu with blood-red eyes, he spoke in a childish voice. Yeah, watchin'. Miuchiu raised the corners of her mouth and rubbed the boy's head. Good name. After saying that, he stood up and looked at the fat man. The man and woman behind him were still bowing and motionless. These two people were from the law enforcement team of Yuhei. After the establishment of the Yanjai dynasty, they were promoted to one of the leaders of the 18 Yun cavalry led by Ji Yufeng. Their mission this time was to escort Fatty to the beast nest. The smile on her face faded and Miuchiu asked, "What do you know about the so-called beast's nest?" The fat man had naturally done enough homework when he came here. He cleared his throat and said, "About half a year ago, the Beast King mysteriously appeared in the nest of beasts deep in southern Xinjiang, and used thunderous means to tame several of the 4 evil spirits in southern Xinjiang. The raging beast tide also began to ravage the surrounding towns at that time. It is said that even Lujins, one of the 2 heroes of the mountains and rivers, went deep into the beast's nest and disappeared without a trace. What's even weirder is that no one has seen the true face of the Beast King from beginning to end." Hearing this, Miuchiu couldn't help but think of the shadow of the Beast King that appeared in the battlefield of the beasts that day. The whole body was wrapped in the shining moonlight, and only a vague outline of a human figure could be seen, and there was also a trace of aura belonging to the realm of Daowen. We didn't get much information about the Beast King from Fatty's mouth. After all, the latter's true identity has not yet been exposed to the public, and Fatty only inferred the information based on some clues. Besides the Beast King in the nest of beasts, there is another person worth noting. The fat man suddenly changed the subject, and the expression on his face became a little solemn. "That's a tree, a 1,000-year-old tree that has been rooted deep in the nest of beasts for thousands of years." "A 1,000-year-old tree," Miuchiu's eyes flashed. "Yes, it is a giant tree that has mutated to a height of hundreds of meters. No one knows how many years it has existed, but what is known is that it has already produced advanced wisdom comparable to human beings. The reason why the 4 evil men of the southern border could live in peace in the 4 corners of the Wanchao Mountains in the past was because of the mutant ancient tree that had grown for thousands of years in the depths of the Wanchao Mountains. At the same time, on a cliff somewhere in the Wanchao Mountains, Lu Jinchang, wearing a tang shirt, stood on the cliff holding a scepter, and the lonely cold wind blew over the cliff. A large bonfire floated in the sky behind him, and he could even smell the smell of cooking smoke. There were nearly 100,000 human troops stationed there. Swish! Just then, there was a rustling sound of footsteps in the jungle behind him. A charming and slender figure walked out of the jungle, and there was no expression on her beautiful face. Lu Qianqian walked to a distance not far behind Lu Jinchang with a calm face and slowly stopped. Until then, Lu Jinchang turned around as if he had realized something belatedly. The smile on his kind face was gone, and his eyes became empty and lifeless. "We are getting closer and closer to the beast's nest, but we still haven't seen the Lord of Eternal Night. He won't come." Lu Jinchang still stood still, and his expression could not tell whether he was happy or angry. Seeing this, Lu Qianqian frowned slightly and bit her plump and sexy red lips subconsciously. "I hope that after the matter is done, you can keep your promise and let my father go." As soon as the voice fell, Lu Qianqian raised her head and looked straight ahead. However, she was not looking at Lu Jinchang's dull face, but at a certain direction behind him. The next second, a faint red shadow suddenly appeared on the edge of the cliff behind him. Faintly, a blood-red robe fluttered on the edge of the cliff, and a vague tall figure emerged behind Lu Jinchang. Countless blood-colored threads like hair were entangled from Lu Jinchang's back, and finally all returned to the red-robed figure. He, of course, I always keep my promises. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 484. Deep in the 10,000 Beasts mountain range, there is a peerless and dangerous place known as the Nest of 10,000 Beasts. In the quiet place of the valley that no one knows about, the scene presented here is very different from what the world imagines. The chirping of birds came from the distant sky, and gentle rays of light shone through the branches and leaves into the forest. From time to time, crystal dew like pearls falls on the green branches and leaves, and the fresh air is filled with a fragrance like rosin. Not far away, there was a faint sound of rushing rivers and mountains hitting rocks, and the rolling mountains in the distance could be seen from the valley. Everything in the valley looks like a fairyland on earth. It is hard to imagine that such a scene can be seen in such a chaotic apocalypse. In the grass below, countless flowers and plants were spread on the ground and turned into a natural bed. A woman wearing a white dress was lying quietly on it, her eyes closed. Silky black hair is scattered on the ground, and the fair and delicate skin looks even more rosy and translucent under the sunlight. There is a petal-like pendant hanging around her neck, and her quiet face is like a sleeping princess, gentle and lovely. At this moment, there was a rustling sound from the mountain forest nearby, followed by a rustling sound of falling branches and leaves. I saw small animals jumping out of the mountains and fields, rabbits, squirrels, sparrows, bobcats. After the apocalyptic mutation broke out, countless humans turned into bloodthirsty zombies, wild animals turned into brutal mutant monsters, and unmutated animals became their main targets. It is rare to see these small animals in groups in the mountains and forests, but now these animals rush out of the mountains and forests without fear, and they all run in the direction of the woman. Countless small animals were scurrying around the woman, with bright and penetrating eyes. A white rabbit jumped next to the woman, stretched out its tongue and gently licked the woman's smooth and delicate cheek. Suddenly, the woman opened her eyes, and the crescent moon disappeared in her clear eyes. The woman seemed not surprised by the various small animals appearing around her. She stretched out her white jade arms to hold the white rabbit in her arms. He touched the white rabbit's head and stood up slowly. The petal-shaped pendant glowed strangely in the sunlight. A woman in a white dress walked barefoot on a grass field paved with fallen leaves. The small animals behind her actually followed the woman. With the surrounding light green tones, the scene was surprisingly warm and healing. Gradually, the woman reached the foot of a towering tree in the valley. The height of the giant tree is no longer visible to the naked eye, and through the faint light falling between the leaves, only a few leaf spots can be seen vaguely. The woman stood under the giant tree and said softly, "Grandpa Tree King, those human coalition forces are about to arrive. Their target is me. If I stay here, it will only bring misfortune to these little guys. It's better to leave." The woman's voice is quite ethereal, sounding as gentle as water, gentle and moving. As the words fell, tiny fireflies of light appeared from underneath the giant tree, surrounding the woman. An old voice came from the giant tree, like an old wise man. "Child, there is no need to doubt that you are the true king of the 10,000 Beasts mountain range, the last hope of the entire beast clan. This is your fate, and it is also the fate of the entire orc tribe." A branch of the giant tree slid downwards quickly, wandering on the grass like an arm. "Every creature here needs you, and all the orcs are looking forward to you leading them to glory." The woman stroked the white rabbit in her arms, and the latter actually seemed to understand and stretched out his tongue to lick the back of the woman's hand, with a look of pleading in his eyes. The chirping of birds and various small animals could be heard in my ears, and the sound sounded reluctant. The woman sighed softly, her clear eyes turned firm, and she raised her head to look towards the far distant east. There is a faint flash of silver light in the pendant around the neck. In the mountains and forests, Muchu and his party stood quietly on the plains and waited. In front of them, they saw a young man with purple skin holding a large number of mutated crystal nuclei in his arms. The color of these crystal nuclei is generally blue, and occasionally you can see a few flashes of deep purple light in a pile. The young man named Yewuchen's eyes shone with light until then. He picked up the mutated crystal core in his arms and started to feast on it. Seeing the boy swallowing the mutated crystal core containing various energies without hesitation, even Yeshinwei next to him was dumbfounded. "Grandma, you're a bear. Is this kid a freak?" He never thought that Yewuchun's way of absorbing energy was so simple and direct. He was chewing the crystal core. What a bear. Ordinary people who eat crystal nuclei may suffer from energy disorder and physical changes at worst, or they may directly explode and die. But the young man in front of him obviously had no such concerns, and in a short time he had devoured the high-level crystal cores that Yeshinwei had collected for a long time. And the energy fluctuations emanating from this young man became more and more powerful. From the most common D level and C level to the later A level, it finally climbed to the S level. The next second, a flash of blood flashed in Yewuchun's eyes, and his fingers immediately passed through the air in front of him. Strong spatial fluctuations emanated, and the space in front of him was torn into a half-man-high passage gate in an instant, leading to the unknown front. Damn it, this is too fierce. Yeshinwei's eyes lit up when he saw this scene. This kid is really gifted. If the situation is not critical now, he would have to pry this kid back to Yungziao City at all costs. As soon as the voice fell, the fat man behind him took the lead and entered the space gate. Then came Zhufeng Ziyu, 2 of the 12 riders of Yuyun. Seeing this, Yeshinwei and Yefenyan also followed into the space channel. Only Muqiu stood in place, looking at the white passage in front of him, and looked at the distant sky. Beast King. Xiao Hanyan's plan is indeed good, but the premise of all this is that the other party must have the strength to match it. Encouraged by the black robe behind him, Muqiu raised a smile on the corner of his mouth and turned to step into the space channel. Let him see what kind of strength the so-called King of Beasts has. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 485. Crack. A white light suddenly flashed on a dark hill, and a white light as thin as a hair appeared in the air. Then, this beam of white light began to spread around, and finally expanded into a space crack as fine as a spider web. The white space fragments fell like broken rubble. As the space crack continued to expand, the last space gate as high as a person emerged several feet from the ground. The next second, several figures stepped out of the space crack, and the space gate slowly closed. The fat man staggered and fell to the ground, waving his hand to wipe away the sweat beads the size of rice grains on his forehead, and said with lingering fear, "Finally I came out." Behind the fat man, you can also see Yewuchun with dark purple skin, Yeshinwei with a short haircut and a ruffian look. The people who appeared on this hill were Muqiu and his party who passed through the space tunnel. Everyone came here through Yewuchun's space jump ability, but the process was far from as simple as imagined. Yewuchun's ability was very unstable. Sometimes he teleported everyone to the cliffs, and sometimes he took everyone to the ferocious beasts. After experiencing a dangerous situation that ordinary people could not imagine, everyone finally arrived at their destination. Is this the beast's nest in the center of the 10,000 Beasts mountain range? Yefenyan looked at the scene in the distance. In front of him was a dark and quiet valley, and everyone was standing on a tall hill at the moment. 2 peaks stood on both sides, tall green plants could be seen around, and vines were all over the cliffs in the distance. Below the valley was a plain hidden in the green plants, stretching all the way to the end of the site. Everything around seemed particularly quiet, not to mention the human army. Even the ferocious beasts commonly seen in the mountains and forests could not be seen. Yeshinwei walked forward and stretched out his arm, the flesh and blood in his palm squirmed, and a pointer-shaped device emerged in his palm. He fiddled with the valley in front of him for a while, and after a while he turned to the crowd and said, "No doubt, this should be the edge of the beast's nest." The fat man looked around, looking at the quiet forest around him, frowned and said, "Something is wrong. Why is it so quiet here?" Muqiu, dressed in a black robe, stood on the hill, overlooking the scene below. His eyes were deep under the mask, and he gradually fell into deep thought. If this is the so-called beast's nest, the long silent sign-in system did not respond at all. Besides, It's not as quiet as it looks on the surface. Muchu's mouth drew an inexplicable smile, and he had already felt countless breath fluctuations just around here. Almost as soon as Muchu's voice fell, Yeshinwei seemed to feel something. Suddenly he turned around and looked around, with a fierce look in his eyes. No, something is happening. In the quiet jungle below the hill where they were, a pair of scarlet eyes suddenly appeared in the deep bushes. The scarlet eyes were full of bloodthirstiness and fierceness, staring at the people on the hill as if they were looking at prey. Before everyone could react, the ground under their feet suddenly began to shake wildly. The violent shaking was like a landslide, and the fat man almost fell off the hill. Roar! However, at this moment, a deafening roar of a ferocious beast came from under their feet, and the grass under their feet stood up like steel needles. A pair of blood-red pupils on the mountainside suddenly opened, and then the ground under their feet began to shake even more wildly. Until then, everyone realized that they were standing on a towering hill, not a huge mountain, but the back of a giant beast. Go! Yeshinwei shook his arms, and his flesh and blood reorganized into a pair of wings, flapping them and jumping down. Tianlai Novel Network. Yefanyan's feet were floating in the air with cyclones rising up. Fatty and Yewuchen also left the hill under the protection of Zufeng and Zuyu. Roar! Just as everyone landed on the ground below, a roar of a beast came from above their heads. As the rocks rolled down, everyone could see clearly what kind of huge monster the hill they were standing on was. On the edge of the dark cliff, a meat mountain monster covered with hair rose from the ground. The hair on its body stood upright like steel needles, its thick limbs were like giant pillars, and its bloody mouth had a pair of tusks like ivory. The huge body was like a prehistoric mammoth, and everyone in front of it was as small as an ant. The ancient breath came to their faces, and everyone, including Yeshinwei, couldn't help but change their expressions. Destruction level. Feeling the strong sense of oppression brought by the behemoth in front of him, Yeshinwei's face became particularly solemn, and he muttered to himself. Everyone had no time to be shocked, because the next second this huge beast was already crushing towards them. The huge body like a meat mountain stepped towards the direction of the crowd, and every movement of the footsteps caused the earth to shake. At this moment, a large group of black figures suddenly rushed out of the jungle around a few people, attacking the direction of the fat man and others. These are all mutant beasts hiding at the edge of the beast nest. Under the roar of the mammoth beast, they came out in full force to destroy the human invaders in front of them. Chasing the clouds, chasing the moon. The two bodyguards beside the fat man saw this and protected the fat man and Yewuchen behind them. He opened the weapon box, and a wave of energy was brewing around him, fighting with the mutant beasts that rushed to kill him from all around. And Yefanyan flew into the air, condensing a large piece of wind blade to attack the birds and beasts flying in the sky. For a moment, the valley that was still silent just now instantly reverberated with the fierce roars of various beasts from all directions. On the other side, Yeshinwei was also trying his best to resist the oppression of the huge beast in front of him. Although they are both destructive level existences, the beast race is naturally strong, and the mammoth beast in front of them is the best among them. Although Yeshinwei's abilities are flexible and changeable, he is obviously not good at this aspect. He fell into a stalemate in a moment when fighting with this beast. Yeshinwei's figure suddenly rose several times taller, and his arms stretched several meters and turned into steel blades. Just as he was about to leap up with his legs bent, a shadow had already covered him in the sky. With a loud bang, the mammoth raised its front hooves and crushed Yeshinwei to the ground. When the former's front limbs were raised, Yeshinwei's body had already turned into a pool of blood foam, merging with the earth. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 486. In the next second, the rotting flesh and blood all over the ground gathered rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, the pool of flesh and blood crushed into bloody foam by the mammoth beast had once again gathered into the appearance of Yeshinwei. Quantum reorganization. This ability gives Yeshinwei the abnormal ability to be completely immune to physical attacks. As long as the flesh and blood of his body still exists in this world, he can be reborn infinitely. After his body regrouped, Yeshinwei's whole body was covered with blood. He wiped the blood around his mouth and looked at the behemoth above his head with bloodshot eyes. Your grandma is a bear, www. On weekdays, as the guardian of a base, he is respected by all people and has extraordinary strength. But after arriving in southern Xinjiang, he suffered setbacks one after another. He was not regarded as the hero who saved southern Xinjiang and even lost face. He was really angry this time. Yeshinwei's limbs were seen taking on a strange green iron color, and his arms, legs and feet turned into sharp steel blades. The whole person was ejected in the next moment, so fast that only a blurred after-image was left in the air, and fierce attacks were launched against the mammoth beast's body from all directions. In an instant, countless sharp blades echoed in the air along with the howling cold wind. And the huge mammoth monster also stopped under Yeshen's majestic offensive. While the two destructive level beings were still entangled, the battle situation in the forest below the valley had become increasingly fierce. A large number of beasts poured out from all directions in the valley, launching a siege towards Fatty and others. Including Yefanyan and Zui Fengzuyu, both of whom were S-level awakeners with extraordinary strength, they were able to block the beast herd for a moment. Zui Feng, who had a resolute face, transformed into a tall tiger man, holding the two laser blades in his hands. The scorching sharp blade cut through the sky, and everywhere it passed were scorched corpses chopped into pieces by the long knife. The scalding laser even burned the air. Coupled with the powerful body of the wind-chasing orc, even those mutated jackals, tigers, and leopards are not their combined enemies. And the heroic woman wearing camouflage clothing has more powerful powers every month. She can actually turn anything she touches with her hands into a bomb. When she puts on the gloves inlaid with crystal nuclei, objects within a radius of dozens of meters can be attracted to them through telekinesis. Then through the infusion of supernatural energy, the surrounding gravel blades instantly turned into extremely lethal gunpowder weapons. The inconspicuous rubble shot out, causing a series of violent explosions in an instant, and countless ferocious beasts were killed in the blast, with their flesh and blood flying everywhere. It can be said that Zuyu is a powerful explosive army. Both Zui Feng and Zuyu are the main force among the 18 Yu Yun cavalry under Ji Yufeng. On weekdays, he leads the Eternal Night Army in various ruins. The box weapons he uses are also the highest technology of Zilan base. Their strength is naturally extraordinary, and they are among the top experts in the S-class. However, as the number of the herd increased, the two gradually felt that they were unable to do what they wanted. Especially since there were several S-level powerful beasts mixed in, and the two of them also showed minor and serious injuries. Surrounded by a herd of beasts, the fat man pulled the little Shota who looked confused and hurriedly avoided the attacks of various beasts. At first, he knew that there was someone beside him, but he still felt confident. Even when facing this huge mammoth beast, he didn't have the slightest fear. With that great king here, what destruction level is not just a slap in the face? But it wasn't until he came back to his senses and found that the figure had disappeared without a trace that the fat man realized the seriousness of the matter. Why did that man just disappear after saying no? Realizing the seriousness of the problem, Fatty did not dare to gamble with his own life, so he quickly used his super speed power and fled crazily with Yewuchen. My little ancestor, have you eaten enough? Yewuchen still looked sleepy. The ordinary crystal cores he ate in his mouth made him feel more and more tasteless, and he slowly shook his head. The fat man's mouth twitched when he saw this, and he helplessly ran away with Yewuchen. Suddenly, a low roar came from the sky ahead. On the destruction-level battlefield ahead, the after-images transformed by Yeshinwei flashed frequently between the bodies of the mammoth beasts, bringing with them a sharp edge. Under frequent slashes, scars appeared on the thick flesh of the giant beast, but it was obvious that these were not fatal to the giant beast. Even so, the giant beast was tired of Yeshinwei's frequent attacks. It roared loudly and exuded a simple aura. The hair all over his body stood up like steel needles and then shot out, instantly piercing Yeshinwei's body and smashing it into a sieve. After a few breaths, Ji Yufeng's body reassembled. He looked at the huge thing above his head, and then at the broken corpses of the ferocious beasts on the ground. After a great battle, the plains were filled with the flesh and blood remains of ferocious beasts. After a moment of fighting between heaven and man, the expression on Yeshinwei's face changed from complicated to fierce, and he looked at the giant beast with a ferocious expression. "Grandma, you're such a bear, you forced me to do this." He turned to look at the blurry flesh and blood on the ground, disgust flashing in his eyes. Then he slapped his chest with his palm, and his body exploded into a ball of blood mist. The exploding flesh and blood instantly fell to the ground, mixed with the disgusting corpses on the ground. The next second, a shocking scene appeared. The remains stained with Yeshinwei's flesh and blood began to gather in one direction. The corpses on the ground seemed to have life, wriggling on the ground in an extremely strange posture. Gradually, the large number of corpses also exploded into a pool of bright red minced meat, which gathered together and looked like a sea of blood from a distance. The next second, the minced meat that gathered into a river actually grew into a flesh and blood giant more than 10 meters high at a speed visible to the naked eye. And with the continuous injection of blood foam under his body, his figure continued to rise. In an instant, the flesh and blood giant transformed by Yeshinwei had already rushed towards the direction of the mammoth beast, and the two behemoths fought in a group above this valley. On another hill in the valley, Mu Qiu, wearing a black robe, was overlooking the valley below, and a faint light flashed under the crimson Prajna mask. After a while, he turned his head to look at the battlefield on the other side, where the flesh and blood giant transformed by Yeshinwei was fighting with the mammoth beast. Feeling the ancient aura emanating from the mammoth beast, Mu Qiu's eyes suddenly flashed with a gleam of light. "This is..." Just above the sky in the distance, a sharp cry echoed over the valley. Faintly, a huge black shadow flashed in the sky. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 487. In a deep valley, two huge monsters were colliding in the dense forest. One of the huge monsters was huge, with limbs like pillars, and it moved with a majestic momentum, shaking the ground under its feet. The hair on its body stood up like steel needles, a pair of tusks like ivory stood up, and it roared like a mammoth from ancient times. The other side was also fighting with a huge monster tens of meters high. What was terrifying was that the whole body of this giant was made up of flowing flesh and blood. Only the body could vaguely recognize the outline of a human, a pair of blood-red pupils were full of violent colors, and the face was even more hideous. This huge flesh and blood giant was transformed by Yeshinwei using his supernatural power. This is the power of quantum reorganization, supernatural power, which can merge itself with anything it touches and turn itself into a more terrifying existence. Yeshinwei was so angry that he used this ability to merge with the limbs and flesh on the ground, and finally condensed into this huge monster of flesh and blood. However, although the ability of quantum recombination is strange and powerful, it also has certain limitations. After Yeshinwei merged with the remains of these monsters that had just died, he had to constantly resist the erosion of the residual souls in these flesh and blood to prevent the residual souls from the bodies of countless beasts from backlashing. Under normal circumstances, Yeshinwei would never choose to merge with these disgusting flesh and blood, but the mammoth beast in front of him was obviously not something he could solve in a short time. At this moment, they were in the depths of the nest of all beasts, and they didn't know how dangerous it was around them. If they continued to delay like this, they didn't know what kind of existence would be brought out. Therefore, Yeshinwei spared no expense to get rid of the huge beast in front of him first. But according to the facts, Yeshinwei still underestimated the strong physique of this mammoth beast. The flesh and blood giant and the mammoth beast continued to entangle and collide. The powerful pressure released by the two destructive level beings instantly alarmed the beasts dormant in the surrounding mountains and forests. For a time, countless mutant beasts hurriedly fled from the mountains and fields, with sad sounds in their mouths, and their target was exactly where the fat man and others were. The jungles and mountains within a radius of 100 miles were turned into a wasteland in the battle and collision between the two. The cliffs on both sides began to collapse, and the momentum was so great that the whole valley trembled. The flesh and blood giant's body continued to collapse in the collision. If it comes to physical strength, the mammoth beast in front of him is a top existence in the destruction level. However, the strange thing is that after each physical collapse, the flesh and blood giant's flesh and blood fell off and healed again. But the violent meaning on the face of the flesh and blood giant became more and more intense, as if it was a peerless evil spirit crawling out of hell, tearing all the creatures in front of it into pieces. With a strange low moan, a hideous expression on his face, he pounced on the body of the mammoth again. The flesh and blood giant transformed by Yeshinwei also inherited his supernatural characteristics, and physical attacks were completely ineffective against him. On the other hand, although the mammoth was extremely strong, its hard skin still showed signs of cracking under the desperate bite and collision of the flesh and blood giant. At the moment when the mammoth's skin was torn, the flesh and blood giant found the right opportunity and pounced, and the flesh and blood around it splashed in the air. Those flesh and blood turned into long blood-red worms, all of which drilled into the cracked skin of the mammoth. Roar! At the moment when these flesh and blood with violent thoughts eroded into the body, as if they were poisoned by blood, the mammoth immediately let out a painful roar. It stepped on the ground, exuding a burst of ancient breath, the energy in its body ran wildly, and the ground under its feet collapsed several feet in an instant. Then, the size of the mammoth beast suddenly increased again in an instant, and it rushed towards the flesh and blood giant transformed by Yeshinwei like a titan mountain. In a flash, the two behemoths were entangled again. On the other side, just as the destruction-level existences were fighting, the battle between Fatty and his party also entered a white-hot stage. Due to the powerful pressure released by the two destruction-level existences, the beasts hidden in the surrounding mountains and forests came out in full force, and the pressure on Fatty and others instantly doubled. Although Zhufeng and Zuyu are the leading S-level powerhouses, they have the technological equipment inherited from the Zilan base in their hands. The cooperation between the two is simply like adding wings to a tiger, complementing each other. At one time, there were countless mutant beasts falling under them, and the surrounding animal corpses had piled up into a small hill. Even so, there were still countless mutant beasts emerging from the mountains and forests on all sides, and the two gradually fell into a dilemma. The fat man not far away was carrying the confused Ye Wuchen in one hand and fleeing in the forest, followed by countless ferocious beasts. At this time, the fat man's supersonic ability came into play. The smooth-talking man did not hesitate to escape for his life. The little boy in his arms had not figured out what happened yet, and he was gnawing on the crystal core in his hand with a blank face, not knowing that the big face of the fat man above him was already wet, and he wanted to cry but had no tears. He thought that his greatest support was by his side, and he was not afraid of the mammoth beast. But who knew that the gentleman disappeared in a blink of an eye, and took away his communication tools for this trip? He was in a life-and-death crisis, and the fat man's mentality collapsed directly. At this moment, a black shadow suddenly jumped out of the dark forest beside him, opened its sinister fangs and bit towards the fat man's fat neck. "It's over." Despair appeared in the fat man's eyes, and he subconsciously closed his eyes. But at this moment, several sharp wind blades broke through the air, followed by a dull sound of heavy objects falling to the ground. The fat man subconsciously opened his eyes, only to see that the strange beast that attacked him had been cut into 2 pieces, and several fierce beasts behind him were also killed by the sharp blades. Raising his head, the fat man saw a slender figure standing in the sky not far in front of him, with cyclones floating around her body. Yefanyan. As a child of destiny born in Yongxiao City, Yefanyan is also an S-level awakener with extraordinary strength. She was seen floating in the air, with a large number of sharp wind blades gathered around her. When she waved her hand, tornadoes attacked. The insects, birds, and beasts that suddenly attacked from the air were all pierced through by the strong wind, and their bodies were annihilated. The jade pendant hanging around her neck was still emitting golden light. Yefanyan felt the energy fluctuations coming from the surroundings, and a solemn look appeared on her delicate face. She turned her head and looked at the 2 destruction-level figures fighting in the distance, and her eyebrows were slightly frowned. A large number of mutant beasts rushed out of the surrounding mountains and forests, and there were even powerful S-level beings, rushing towards them with fierce faces. If this goes on. Thinking for a moment, she bit her lower lip lightly, and a resolute look flashed in Yefanyan's beautiful eyes. She suddenly clenched the jade pendant on her chest and poured all her energy into it. In an instant, the dark green jade pendant flashed an extremely dazzling golden light. The patterns on the surface of the jade pendant bloomed, and the dark green jade pendant instantly became crystal clear under the shining golden light. The shadow of a long sword circled in the jade pendant. The golden holy light spread out like a majestic wave, and the countless beasts that attacked Yefanyan were all bounced away. What is that? In the distance, Zufeng and Ziyu, who were still fighting with many strange beasts, felt the breath of the holy light for the first time, and looked in the direction of Yefanyan with shocked eyes. Yefanyan's whole body was bathed in the holy golden light, and her long hair fell to her waist at some point. Under the shining of the golden light, her hair was stained with golden light. What was even more incredible was that the originally dark and hideous scars on Yefanyan's face disappeared completely under the shining of the golden light, without a trace. The next moment, Yefanyan suddenly opened his eyes, and a golden light appeared between his clear pupils. The golden light in the jade pendant finally gathered into a vague shadow of a long sword. She slowly stretched out her hand and grabbed the vague shadow of the long sword in front of her. The moment she touched the shadow of the long sword, the transparent golden long sword actually became substantial with the naked eye. She stretched out her jade hand and suddenly grasped the hilt of the golden holy sword. For a moment, a vast holy aura emanated from Yefanyan in all directions. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 488. On the top of the mountain in the distance, Mu Qiu, dressed in black robe, had a panoramic view of everything below. The battle between the flesh and blood giant transformed by Yeshinwei and the mammoth beast did not move him at all. Until he saw Yefanyan bathing in the holy light and pulling out the golden holy sword, the expression under the mask changed slightly, and a faint light flashed in his deep eyes. He also raised his hand, and a dark vortex suddenly appeared beside him. In the vortex is a space where black shadows and flames intertwine. In that void space, a domineering red sword was standing in the sky, with unparalleled power. You can vaguely see the shadow of a red dragon hovering over the sword, emitting long and shocking chants. This red sword was made by Mu Qiu himself. It is a supreme artifact that openly confronts the law of heaven and affects the fate of the Yanjai clan. Use the heaven and earth as a furnace, the blazing flames as fire, control the destiny of a clan, sacrifice the faith of all souls, and attract souls to forge swords. Royal Knight Sword. At this moment, Wan Quan Yejian seemed to feel something. The sword's body flickered with red light as it trembled, and even the black runes on the sword began to swim erratically. Mu Qiu felt the strange behavior of Wan Quan Yejian and had some realization. This sword carries the destiny of the clan and cannot be forged by any weapon. The embryo that created this royal night sword was the world seed that Muchu brought back from that broken world. To be able to make this royal night sword react like this, it seems that the holy sword in Yefanyan's hand really has an extraordinary origin. Muchu's eyes suddenly thought of what if the holy sword in Yefanyan's hand was integrated into the royal night sword. Then what kind of changes will happen to Wangjian, and what impact will it have on the Yanjai royal family whose destiny is implicated by Wangjian? A holy sword that contains the power of heaven? Looking at the beautiful woman standing in the sky on the battlefield below, Muchu's eyes became a little darker. His eyes shifted to the battlefield in the valley. After Yefanyan took hold of the golden holy sword, the many strange beasts below seemed to be frightened by something, wailing in their mouths, with a bit of fear in their eyes. The golden light seemed to cover Yefanyan with a layer of gauze, and her green hair turned into gold the moment she held the holy sword. Coupled with that exquisite and beautiful face, Yefanyan at this moment is like a goddess descending to earth, holy and refined. Yefanyan's eyes glowed with gold, and he waved the holy sword in his hand calmly. A pale golden edge shot through the air, and a large number of strange beasts below were instantly split into two by the sword light. Roar! At this moment, the super ferocious beasts surrounding Yefanyan finally couldn't hold it any longer, and showed their sharp claws and ghastly fangs, and their huge bodies rushed towards Yefanyan. Yefanyan's expression was dull, and she saw the hurricane floating behind her, and it actually condensed into a pair of transparent wings as thin as cicada wings. When incited, the whole person soared like an elf, and raised the golden holy sword in her hand. With the blessing of the surrounding golden light, the blade of the holy sword actually began to extend infinitely. Until several S-level beasts were about to attack in front of him, Yefanyan's eyes suddenly became firm, and with a soft drink, he swung down the holy sword held high in his hand. In an instant, golden sword light shone between the heaven and the earth, and the eyes of the surrounding ferocious beasts lost their light under this beam of golden light. All the ferocious beasts that attacked Yefanyan had their bodies torn apart under the sword and fell to the ground wailing in pain. Some fragile ferocious beasts were directly wiped out by that powerful sword. What a powerful wave! Zuifeng and Zuyu below felt the aura contained in the golden light and looked at each other. The energy contained in this wave alone is already close to that of a destructive level powerhouse. The two of them looked at the woman in the sky in disbelief, their eyes full of horror. Who is this woman? On the other side, the battle between Yeshinwei and the mammoth beast is gradually coming to an end. The huge beast was now covered in bruises, blood gushed out from the deeply cracked skin like spring water, and the ground beneath its feet was shaking crazily. The flesh and blood giant transformed by Yeshinwei was also scarred, and the flesh and blood that fell off his body continued to recondensate, while the violent expression on the giant's face became increasingly out of control. Every reunion consumes Yeshinwei's mind, and he also has to fight against the remaining souls in his flesh and blood. When his mind is completely lost, it means that his body will fall out of control and completely turn into a cruel and bloodthirsty beast. At this moment, the holy light wave released by Yefanyan in the distance instantly attracted the attention of two destruction-level beings. I saw that the flesh and blood giant's eyes regained a little clarity, and he was about to rush in the direction of the holy light. Unexpectedly, the giant mammoth reacted even more violently. It suddenly roared violently, moved its limbs and ran in the direction of Yefanyan. The two were about to fight each other again, but suddenly a long cry came from the sky. A harsh cry echoed in the airs, and then another huge figure fell from the sky. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 489. Almost at the moment when the golden light in the distance was shining, the flesh and blood giant transformed by Yeshinwei sensed the abnormality in the distant battlefield. A clear look flashed in his violent eyes, and he was about to rush towards the battlefield in front. However, what was unexpected was that the huge mammoth beast beside him actually roared and rushed straight towards the direction of the light source. In an instant, the two behemoths were entangled again, and the battle was fierce. After the previous battle, both suffered heavy losses, but the difference was that the mammoth beast was covered with scars of all sizes, and the situation was miserable. In contrast, the body of the flesh and blood giant can be reborn infinitely, but every aggregation will cause the tyranny on its face to become more intense. Accompanied by the strange roar of the flesh and blood giant, the whole body crushed on the huge body of the mammoth beast. Countless sticky flesh and blood poured down on the mammoth beast like a waterfall, eroding into the body along the cracked wounds. The blood poison filled the mammoth's limbs and bones, causing it to let out a long painful howl in an instant. Its huge body also fell to the ground, and the surrounding ground collapsed several inches in an instant. The flesh and blood giant transformed by Yeshinwei pushed forward with both arms, and the sticky blood turned into a long knife, and he was about to take the opportunity to kill the mammoth that fell to the ground. Clang! At this moment, a piercing cry suddenly came from the sky, followed by a black shadow covering the sky swooping down. The huge black shadow swept across the sky, bringing a powerful impact, and instantly knocked down the body of the flesh and blood giant. Yeshinwei manipulated the giant to stagger and stand up, and there were 2 bloody wounds and scratches on the shoulders of the flesh and blood. A huge figure appeared in front of Yeshinwei, and it turned out to be a huge blue peng bird. It looks like an eagle, with a huge body, sharp eyes, and a sharp edge, and its claws are as firm as iron clamps. When its wings float, the hurricane around it can hear the sound of cranes. Shan Haijing once said that its wings are like clouds hanging from the sky. Although the wings of the big peng bird in front of us are not as exaggerated as covering the sky, they are more than 10 meters long, which makes people amazed. Yalan's wings are flashing with layers of light, and from a distance it seems to be burning with ghost fire from the depths of hell. Once the peng bird appeared in the world, the air around it seemed to stagnate for a few breaths, and the airflow became cold in an instant, and an extremely terrifying breath came to his face. Yeshinwei's mind also reached the limit at this time, and he could not control the violent intention in his heart. The remaining soul resentment in the fused flesh and blood seemed to open a pair of bloody hands, trying to drag him into the endless sea of blood. www. The next second, the flesh and blood giant with blood flowing all over his body rushed towards the direction of the peng bird. The flesh and blood giant's body exploded in mid-air the moment it pounced on the peng bird, and turned into flesh and blood splashing forward. This time, Yeshinwei, whose mind had fallen into madness, actually planned to directly merge his flesh and blood with the peng bird and assimilate it directly. The peng bird cried, and a touch of human coldness appeared in its sharp eyes. He flapped his wings, and the flashing light between his wings instantly rolled up a large piece of blue flame. The flesh and blood splashing around was frozen into cold fragments by the blue flame in an instant and fell to the ground. All the flesh and blood that tried to splash on the peng bird were frozen into ice by the blue flame. The remaining flesh and blood seemed to be frightened, and it squirmed and gathered on the ground in the distance, and finally turned into the appearance of the flesh and blood giant again. But this time the flesh and blood giant was obviously several times smaller than before, and the chest with blood flowing was constantly rising and falling. As the residual soul in the flesh and blood was eliminated, the head of the flesh and blood giant unexpectedly turned into the appearance of Yeshinwei, and the rage in his eyes gradually faded. Yeshinwei looked at the huge peng bird that suddenly appeared in front of him, and fear appeared in his eyes. This is a destructive beast, and a destructive beast with elemental ability. In the mountain forest battlefield on the other side, the brilliant golden light that shone throughout the field became much dimmer with the passage of time. Surprisingly, the roar of the beasts that originally spread across the valley also subsided a lot at this moment, and the atmosphere in the air was filled with a strange silence. In the center of the wasteland under the valley, where the golden light source was located, a beautiful woman with blonde hair and blue eyes was standing with a sword. Yefanyan was holding a golden holy sword, and the beasts around her who tried to kill her were often swept by the hurricane surrounding her before they approached, and their bodies were cut into pieces. And some powerful beasts relied on their strong bodies to resist the wind and attacked Yefanyan. But the next second, under the illumination of the holy light, the bodies of these monsters actually stopped in mid-air. Yefanyan immediately swung the golden holy sword in his hand, with an irresistible holy edge. Even those S-level beings were not his opponents. After a while, Yefanyan was surrounded by a pile of broken animal corpses, among which there were even some S-level terrifying beings. In the distance, the fat man carried Yewuchan, who looked confused, and looked at the big scene in front of him in amazement. Oh my God, this is too fierce. He didn't expect that Yefanyan alone could solve thousands of ferocious beasts that came to kill him. After the transformation, the strength has also changed dramatically. It turns out that the people around that gentleman are not simple. After Yefanyan summoned the holy sword to kill everyone, the shining holy light continued to consume her physical energy. Finally, when the light dimmed to a certain point, the energy in Yefanyan's body was exhausted, and the surrounding golden light also dissipated. The long golden hair turned back into black hair, and the holy sword in his hand turned into golden particles and returned to the jade pendant. Yefanyan slowly landed on the ground, and her delicate face turned extremely pale. Seeing this, Fatty and others quickly came forward, only to hear Yefanyan weakly say, "Get out of here quickly." The fat man turned his head and looked around. There were many ferocious beasts in the distance looking at them eagerly, but they were all instinctively afraid of the powerful pressure released by Yefanyan just now and did not dare to move forward. Go quickly." The fat man quickly spoke to Zui Feng and Zuyu beside him. The latter quickly pulled Yefanyan's weak body and ran towards the forest behind. Although both of them were still seriously injured, this was obviously the best time to leave this place. The secluded forest in the distance was right in front of them, but within a few moments, the group of people would escape into the hidden forest behind them. But at this moment, dots of fireflies suddenly appeared in the sky, blocking the way of everyone. This is... Before Fatty and the others could react, a gust of wind suddenly hit them in mid-air. Zui Feng, who transformed into an orc, was unexpectedly knocked away by a sudden thick vine, and a deep blood mark appeared on his chest. Immediately afterwards, everyone felt a violent shaking on the ground beneath their feet. Thick vines emerged from the depths of the ground and appeared in all directions. The thick and solid rattan instantly formed a cage, imprisoning everyone within it. At the same time, a harsh and loud cry suddenly came from the distant sky. Accompanied by a strong and suffocating wind, a huge figure appeared in the forest in front of everyone. This was actually a huge rock bird, with a blue body and flowing blue flames flashing on its wings. Upon closer inspection, the sharp claws of this rock were holding a humanoid figure. It was Yeshinwei, who was covered in blood. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 490. At this moment, Yeshinwei's whole body was stained with thick blood, and he looked like a bloody man, unconscious and caught by the Peng bird. The Peng bird first looked at the miserable battle in the forest, where the ground was full of animal corpses and blood soaking the earth. Then it cast its eyes in the direction of the cage where everyone was. With a flash of blue light, the huge body of the Peng bird disappeared, and a sturdy bird-headed beastman appeared on the ground in the distance. The head still looked like a Peng bird, but the body had turned into a sturdy human shape, with a pair of blue wings behind him, shining like an eagle god descending from the sky. The sturdy birdman carried the unconscious bloody man on his shoulders and slowly walked to the cage where everyone was. His sharp eyes scanned the area, but he turned to the giant tree beside him and said in human language, "Lord Tree King, do you want to deal with these people on the spot?" As he spoke, the wings behind him spread out, and a cold air instantly filled the world. The fat man in the cage opened his eyes wide when he saw this, and hurriedly said, No, 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 don't get me wrong, we are from the Eternal Night Dynasty in the East Sky Domain, and we are here to cooperate with the Beast King to fight against the human coalition. The fat man waved his hands to explain, and raised a token burning with black flames from his pocket. Because he couldn't figure out Mewtwo's purpose, the fat man didn't rashly negotiate with the beast nest according to the plan. But now it's a matter of life and death, the fat man naturally can't care so much, and almost blurted it out. Eternal Night Dynasty. Hearing these 4 big words, Yefanyan, who was trapped in the cage, was shocked. She raised her head in disbelief and looked at the fat man and others, her eyes full of horror. But the weakness in her body made her unable to speak. In addition, she was shocked by what the fat man said, and her vision gradually blurred, and she fell into a coma. Eternal Night Dynasty. Just as the fat man looked terrified, the giant tree next to him suddenly glowed with fluorescence, and then an old voice came out of it. After a while, the old voice came out again. Take them back to the beast's nest first. As soon as the voice fell, the fluorescence on the giant tree slowly dissipated. Then, the vine cage that wrapped everyone was quickly folded and turned into a flower bud, and then took everyone deep underground and disappeared. Yes. Seeing this, the birdman nodded, grabbed Yeshinwei who had turned into a bloody man, and his body shook and turned into the giant bird again, flying towards the back of the valley. Almost at the moment when the birdman took off, he did not notice that a black-robed figure was standing quietly on the hill in the distance. Is that the beast's nest? Mewtwo looked at the direction where the birdman left, and the corners of his mouth under the mask rose slightly. The next second, the whole person turned into a wisp of black flame and disappeared without a trace. Under the dim night sky, the originally lonely and desolate valley was filled with dense figures. The candlelight rose high, and the human soldiers who came from various bases covered the mountain forest like a tide. In addition to these ordinary humans, a large number of human awakeners gathered in the valley ahead. Everyone had a solemn look on their faces, looking at the quiet valley ahead. They knew that the front was their final goal of this trip, the nest of all beasts. After going through many dangerous situations and wiping out countless beasts, they finally arrived at the final battlefield in front of them. Standing at the forefront of the team were several powerful destructive level beings such as Lujins and Shihaoshan. In addition to the Lucien Taoist who came before, there were actually 3 more destructive level beings here. There are 6 destructive level masters leading the way, plus the 100,000 human army behind them. This lineup is really rare in the world. Not to mention the destructive level existence hidden in the dark like Yeshinwei. This time, the encirclement and suppression of the beast nest is no less than the redemption battle that killed the Lord of Eternal Night that day. Shihaoshan looked at the quiet and deep valley in front of him and slowly said, "Is the beast nest in the deepest part of the 10,000 Beasts mountain range in front of him?" As a powerful existence that is about to transcend the destructive level, the Beast King should be vigilant no matter how vigilant he is. Another guardian on the side said hesitantly, "There are several other destructive level existences who have not joined us. Let's wait." Lujin Chang, however, held the scepter and waved his hand solemnly. "It doesn't matter. I have received news from the Thunder God. He will arrive at the beast nest in a few days." Thor. As soon as these words came out, the faces of several destruction-level masters around them suddenly became stern, with awe in their eyes. Even the strong-willed Shihaoshan stopped talking. "Great, as long as the Thunder God comes out, killing the Beast King will be a piece of cake." The destruction-level master who just spoke showed a happy expression on his face, which shows how important the Thunder God is in everyone's heart. All this is because the Beast King is recognized as the strongest of the human race, a rare elemental twin awakener. Lujin Chang looked down at the time in his pocket watch. "It's almost time." He looked at the several destruction-level masters around him and nodded slowly. He tapped the ground with his scepter, and the ground under his feet actually cracked a crack, and a heavy voice said, All troops, listen to my order. From now on, do your best to encircle and destroy the beast's nest. Kill the Beast King and defend the southern border. Kill the Beast King and defend the southern border. As Lu Jinchang finished speaking, the soldiers behind him echoed him, and countless figures began to rush towards the valley like a tide. At this moment, the continuous artillery fire started, and the artillery fire as dense as stars bombarded the sky above the valley. The silent valley was suddenly filled with loud noises. At this moment, the final battle to encircle and destroy the beast's nest began.